The goal of this video is not to convince you to believe in astrology, but rather explain to you what it's really about, how it works, and what to keep in mind if you choose to explore it. I honestly don't believe that you should just blindly follow whatever someone says to you, but rather start exploring it from different perspectives, like the pro and the cons on that said subject, and then make a decision for yourself. Regardless if that is a spiritual practice, a health practice, or something like astrology. Just like with any tool that you choose, it's not so much about which one you choose, as much more how you're going to use it. For example, the most poisonous substance can become a healing substance if used correctly, and the most healing substance can become a poison if used wrongly. And it's the same with astrology. If you use it in the right way, it can enhance your life and benefit your life. But if you use it wrong, it can also have negative consequences for you. Hello and welcome back. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chada. In this video, I want to look at 4 specific parts when it comes to astrology. First of all, what is it and what is it not? How does it work? Like, what is the basic principle behind astrology? What its purpose is, and what to be aware of if you decide to explore this subject further. So what is astrology and what is it not? The way I like to look at it is as an ancient self-development tool, kind of like a personality test made by the stars. So the kind of personality test that you can do on the internet, it's kind of the same with astrology, with the difference that you are not filling out the answers, but rather the sky already filled it out the moment you were born. So the moment you were born, the planets were in a very specific position that represent your inner dynamics. And the astrologer makes an interpretation of that chart. In that chart, you can basically see everything, all the characteristics, all the potential that a human has in the positive sides and also the negative sides, like the best expression of that chart, but also the most destructive expression of that chart. Or destructive might not even be the right word, but rather the challenging part where that person might struggle and how that struggle might show up. What astrology is not, it's not flawless and it's not perfect. The reason that people might have such a hard time with astrology is because it's not very scientific. When you have a certain constellation, it's not just like this one little expression that it can manifest as. It's like a range of possibilities, and the astrologer just kind of opens up the field of showing you, okay, this is the range that we are working with, but it's not necessarily possible to pinpoint, okay, it's gonna be exactly like this or exactly like that. And I guess this is one of the reasons that people are like, oh, astrology is just some woo-woo stuff, because they're expecting like that scientific answer, like 1 + 1 = 2, and this is not how astrology works. Another reason on why astrology is not flawless is because it's ever evolving. We are discovering new stars, new planets that give us a new layer of interpretation when it comes to astrology. So getting those new informations gives us new insights that also slightly change the interpretation itself. To give you an example, in the ancient days, astrology was only consistent of the 2 luminaries, which would be the sun and the moon, and the 5 planets that were visible to the naked eye. However, once the telescope was invented and they discovered Uranus and Neptune, people were like, oh, see, astrology never worked because we were always missing those parts. So that doesn't mean that the previous interpretation was wrong. It just means that we have another layer to add to that interpretation. So how does astrology work? There is actually one basic principle that you have to understand in order to understand how astrology actually works. And that is the principle of as above, so below, as within, so without. Basically, what this phrase means is whatever happens in the sky happens on Earth. Not necessarily because we are controlled by what happens in the sky, but rather because we mirror what is happening in the sky. You can also say whatever happens on Earth is reflected in the sky, but also what happens outside of us also happens inside of us. For example, the relationship that you have with your mother represents the nurturing relationship that you have with yourself. So if you have like a very harsh and toxic relationship with your mother, which is the nurturing aspect, it's very likely that you might be having a toxic, nurturing relationship with yourself, that you constantly criticize yourself or you never allow yourself to take a break. So it's again this mirror aspect. Whatever happens outside of you also happens inside of you. Another way on how to look at those principles, especially from a Greek perspective from ancient time. The ancient Greeks actually took this principle of above, so below, very, very literally. So back in the days when you would have been brought to trial because you stole something, the accused person could basically defend themselves with saying, I don't know what happened, it was Hermes taking over me. In case you don't know, Hermes is attributed to the thief and, stealing things and all that kind of stuff. So basically you could defend yourself with saying that the gods basically took over. If we look at that from a psychological perspective, the way we look at it is that there is a part of yourself, an archetypal energy inside of you that demands attention for one reason or another. This is basically what I explained in the Greek God series. If you've watched it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't watched it, feel free to check it out and you will get a better understanding on what this principle means, in the sense when that archetypal energy of you is taking over or it's heavily suppressed. Next, let's look on what the purpose of astrology is. So the main goal of astrology is gaining clarity and insight. Whether this is about understanding yourself better or predicting the future, it's always the same goal. It's about understanding what is happening or what will happen. So astrology can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used for synastry charts, meaning how compatible two people are. It can be used as a horary chart, which is about looking into the future, and it can also be as a natal chart interpretation, where it's a lot about understanding the psychology of that person. So said simply, it's really about that element of understanding. Whatever it is that you're trying to understand, astrology is the tool that can help you gain that. Lastly, there are a few things that I want to look at if you decide to explore astrology further. One of the questions that eventually comes up when you dive into the world of astrology is the question of fate versus free will. So if everything is written in the stars and we can only predict it, do we even still have free will? Quite honestly, I don't think there's the one answer to it. Everybody has to find their own answer. I know people who really believe in fate and think that everything is already pre-written, and I know other people who very much believe in free will and that they are the only one deciding on what their life is going to look like. I personally think it's a combination of both. I think there is an element of fate, but I also think there is a very big element of free will. So the way I see it, it's like life happens and you have no control over it, but you have control over how you react to life. And that's the free will part to me, like the decision on how I'm going to react to it. And fate is just that part that you cannot control. This is also why I want you to take any interpretation that you might receive with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, again, we're talking about free will. I think you are the one deciding, are you going to take on this, or what are you going to do with this? How are you going to handle this? It might be there and there might be nothing that you can do about this, but the way you react to it, that is totally up to you. And I want to make sure that you keep that power of yourself, that you don't feel like a victim to astrology or the stars or someone doing an interpretation to you, because you aren't. Which brings me to the last part that I really want to mention, especially if you decide to get a reading from an astrologer. What to keep in mind and what to be aware of when choosing an astrologer. And these are just my personal recommendations to you. First of all, I will be very attentive when someone says, oh, this is a difficult chart. So a chart in itself is never good or bad. It's never easy or difficult. There is just different energies at play that show different dynamics. So every chart has its strengths and has its weaknesses, so there's no good or bad to it. Lastly, when you are receiving a reading, it should always feel expansive and not restrictive. This is very important. You should never leave a reading feeling like, darn, I'm screwed for life. This is not the goal. It can be that you might be faced with an aspect of your life that you're like, I kind of knew it and I don't like it, and that is totally okay. But it should never make you feel like you're doomed because of your chart. Because the chart, and especially the interpretation of your chart, should make you feel like you have potential, like even though there are challenging aspects, there's a way to grow and learn from it and actually benefit from it as well. So in case you ever receive a reading that you don't feel comfortable with, that makes you feel bad afterwards, first of all, feel free to stop the reading whenever you want, because it's your choice on how to handle it. And second, if you have received a bad reading in the past and there might still be things that you are struggling with, feel free to choose another astrologer and explain to them what happened. Depending on their reaction, you will know if this might be an astrologer that you want to work with or not. In the end, astrology is not about labeling you or limiting your potential. It's a tool, it's a guide that you can choose as much or as little as you want to. Whether you choose it as a tool of self-reflection or to see ahead on what's coming next in your life, it's totally up to you. If you are already familiar with astrology, it might have been very interesting. If you're totally new to astrology, it might have been a lot. Don't worry about it. You have just given like a huge download, and you might have to process different parts. Maybe it's also going to be helpful for you to just look at different sections of the video and reflect those parts and see what resonates and what not. Also, if you have still questions, feel free to ask them. I will answer them as best as I can. If you're like, oh, this part I would like to get more or understand more about that part, for example, how to choose the right astrologer, you can let me know in the comments down below as well. I can easily make a video of that too, so just let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.